You're muted, but we're starting the stream, so you got it. Carlos,
Yes, hi.
how are you?
Good. How are you?
I love that color all in the back. Is this your house?
It is, yes. We we like color.
I see, and your outfit is lovely too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It looks like I'm a little bit backlit. Should I move to a better room?
No, I think you're fine. I mean, you look fine to me.
Okay,
I
okay.
mean, if you don't feel like but I mean, you'll look at it again and you'll be like, oh yeah, I was, but maybe not. I don't know. I can see all the colors, so it looks good. So
Okay.
Harry, are we going right into Harry? You'll give us
Yeah,
the high five when it's time to go, or are we just
we're
going
actually
now?
we're actually live right
Because I just
now.
had another guest, and so what we try to do is we try to end that show, even though it's a 2-hour show. We try to treat them as two separate shows.
Yeah, so we're actually live right now, Babz.
Okay, so we're live. Hi, good morning.
Yeah, and
Morning.
you're listening to LoveBabz Love Talk on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
So I'm welcoming Carlos Moreno, the state director of the Working Families of Connecticut and the Working Families Organization of Connecticut. So welcome, because you're here to talk about. Now, I am fascinated by this because I read the New York Times article. I had no idea this was going on, and how prevalent and how terrible this is, where employers, particularly like these fast food restaurants or anyone that has a scheduling kind of concept, but the state of New York is suing Chipotle because workers are coming to work and then they're being told, oh, it's slow, or go home, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And then they could be called back to close, or they could be called back a few hours later, or all kinds of things. That's no set schedule, and that infringes on their ability. It infringes on workers' rights, I would imagine. Oh, am I off base, or?
No, that's exactly correct. It's a basic labor standard, and the Fair Work Week law that exists in New York City is one that's been around for about the last 3 or 4 years, and it regulates scheduling practices among these big box chain stores and fast food restaurants that employ folks at very, very low wages. And the experience that folks have working in these kinds of places is that their schedules are extremely erratic, just like you said. They are, forced to work on call where they're holding, a particular day open for the chance that they might come in. And unfortunately, many of these folks tend to have a second job. And when they have to hold their schedules open, they can't take work at another job. So it creates a lot of instability. It's very destabilizing financially for families. And more than that, it really interferes with the ability to care for your family. For example, we know the folks that are most disproportionately affected by this tend to be single women of color because they work in these lowest paid jobs, these low wage service sector jobs across retail, hospitality, and restaurants, and not just fast food restaurants, but also table dine-in restaurants as well, like Applebee's and Chili's and these kinds of places. They also shoulder the burden of being the primary caregiver at home, taking care of elderly family or kids. And when we're talking about Black women and Latinas, they also tend to be the primary breadwinner. So in the home. So when we're talking, or they are the primary breadwinner in the home because they're single women. So what we're talking about here is this. What I like to say is kind of like a vortex of instability. You never know when you're going to be scheduled, when you're going to call in. You can't count on the hours that you're scheduled to work, because even if you are on the schedule and you come and you go to work and report to work, you're sent home because a manager might have overscheduled because they were expecting it to be more busy and they didn't, impart more responsibility in that they wait to scheduled, or use all kinds of technology that's available to figure out what traffic is going to be into a store based on any given day. This is all available data that plenty of places already use, but is not commonly used, especially in the restaurant business or in the retail service sector. So all that to say, a healthy work week is one where folks can expect a little bit of predictability in their schedules, right? We want to know if we're going to be working 20 hours or 30 hours, because then I need to know if I have to hire a babysitter or not. I also need to know if I'm going to be able to pay my bills at the end of the month. So I need to have some consistency when it comes to the amount of income that I'm expecting, so that I can, properly budget my family. So, as you mentioned, the city of New York is suing Chipotle which is an example of, why these laws are so necessary. That happens to be one of the most egregious examples, but not one that's uncommon, but it's egregious because this is a company that already has a bad record. In 2020, I believe, they settled out of court for $1.3 million for violating child labor laws.
And in this day and age?
In this day and age, yep. And that was the tip of the iceberg the city of New York had found, which prompted them, I believe, to investigate further into that company. And they looked at how their scheduling practices were taking place after the Fair Workweek law was passed in New York City. And that's when they found that the company violated. They found over 599,000 individual violations of the Fair Workweek law between 2017 and 2019. On average, they have about 6,500 plus employees in New York City. On average, those employees experience at least 3 scheduling violations per week. So the city.
Wow.
Yep. The city is suing for $450 million, which includes $150 million in back pay for workers and $300 million in penalties. Every time that there's a violation of the law, each instance is a certain amount of monetary compensation that has to be paid to the city in penalties. So do the math, I guess, with 599,000 labor violations, it adds up. So
Chipotle must feel like they could get away with this. I mean, they're not broke. Like, they are making money. I would imagine. I mean,
they profited hand over fist during the pandemic. Actually, their sales increased, I believe, by about 15 or 20%. I could be mistaken, but it was substantial. And their share prices have gone up. They have not been suffering in the stock market. In fact, they've gone the other way. They have been experiencing a booming stock market. And as we all know, that monetary gain is often not shared with the workers that they employ, but it really goes to boost executive pay or, to do things like stock buybacks that, benefit shareholders over workers. So that happens to be an example of why we need this law in Connecticut. In a state where I think we're currently 3rd ranked in income inequality, where the service sector jobs, these retail jobs, hospitality and restaurant jobs are the jobs that actually drove us out of the recession from 2008. The folks that tend to be most disproportionately affected by these scheduling practices, as I said, are people of color, and also the folks that are suffering the most under our regressive taxation policies that we have in the state as well. So this is Fair Workweek. Laws are, a step in the right direction. We passed the minimum wage in 2019, and we also passed paid family and medical leave. The full $15 minimum wage goes up to $15 in 2024, and that's an important step. But this law, the Fair Workweek law, really goes hand in hand with the minimum wage, because if you can't count on the hours that you're scheduled to work, then what good is the minimum wage if you can't count on those hours, as I said. So it's really part of a comprehensive economic agenda for workers in our state who really have shouldered the burden of driving us out of the recession to a large degree and happen to be the backbone of our state because we rely on them so much.
Because Carlos, I think people think that Chipotle and jobs like that are held down by kids, high school kids, college kids. So, what does it matter if their schedules change or whatever? But that's not really the picture. The picture is these are people with families and responsibilities and commitments and running households that need continuity and a schedule that they can count on for all the things that you said. That they hire a babysitter, they got to pay their bills.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They got to pay their bills. Sometimes they have a second job and they might be in workforce training or pursuing an education, trying to, go to college and get a degree, right? So when, your school schedule doesn't change, so it's very inflexible, and they're dealing with a very erratic, unstable, inflexible scheduling situation at work too. It's just unsustainable, and it's no wonder that folks can't get ahead and have to delay pursuing educations because they just can't commit to it because they have to earn money to be able to pay their bills. So it's really quicksand, I like to say.
Wow. So we have a bill moving through
Yes, we have we have a good, strong, fair work week law that's being proposed in the legislature currently, and it seems to be gaining some traction because of the Chipotle news that came out a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And we would be the second state to do this. Oregon has been the first state, but this law has been passed mostly at the municipal level in large cities that have roughly almost the same amount of workforce as the state of Connecticut, because we're a smaller state compared to others. And most recently, it's been passed in Philadelphia, Chicago. This law exists in San Francisco, New York City, as I said, Emeryville outside of San Francisco. And it's very similar to the legislation that's in New York City, which would really seek to give more control, or at least a voice for workers over their schedules, because currently they have no control over them. Typically, folks that work in retail or restaurants, I think the data says that 66% have experienced volatile schedules. That means that they are overscheduled and sent home. They are on-call scheduled, and then then they're asked not to show up to work. They are underscheduled. That's a chronic problem in retail, especially when we're talking about the big box chains in retail. Something that commonly happens is that folks aren't allowed to work more than, say, 25 hours a week or 30, because they don't want to be considered full-time employees, because then they would qualify for benefits like healthcare. To only 12% of workers in retail work full-time. So
wow, 12%?
That's working 35 hours or more. So
wow.
36 hours or more, which is what would qualify you for full health benefits. The sad truth is, in many of these establishments, when you get a job at low wages and you don't qualify for health care, they direct you to Medicaid. So folks that are working, 2 jobs, 40 hours, 50 hours a week, sometimes 60 hours a week, can't qualify for health care in either place. But then because they might reach just above the federal poverty level line, because they're working minimum wage and just making above that, once it goes up, they don't qualify for health care at their jobs, but then they can't qualify for Medicaid, but then they don't make enough to qualify for the full premium subsidy. So they fall in what's called the coverage gap when it comes to the healthcare exchange. It's a really toxic situation for them. So that's what the bill seeks to correct. It seeks to correct, it would prohibit on-call scheduling. It would call for more stable scheduling practices, which would require employers. And it's important to note that this bill would be targeting the big multinational corporations, such as all the big box chains. Mm-hmm. So, it's not targeting the small businesses. I always say, though,
that's good to know. That's good to know.
It is. And, but, all the data says anywhere that these policies are in place, that there has never been a negative impact on the business itself. Quite the opposite. It's either been no impact or positive impact. And that, when we look at a store like The Gap, for example, there was a study that was done from 2018, which looked at their fair scheduling policies before there was actually a law. They volunteered to take a look at these fair scheduling practices and see how they compared to other stores that weren't doing these fair scheduling practices. And they found that over that period where they looked at the pilot program and they looked at the control group, the stores in the pilot program actually had gains in employee productivity. There was better retention, less turnover, better employee morale, because folks felt healthier. They could rely on their hours a little bit better. And they directly tied that to sales. There was a 7% sales increase in those stores over that time compared to the control group. Mm-hmm. So we know, regardless of any size, these policies should be amenable to all businesses. But because of the situation that we find ourselves in here in Connecticut, where we have strong opponents in the Restaurant Association that typically hide behind the impact on small businesses, they can't do that any longer. And we know that they really want to protect the large businesses and the big box chain stores. And these are stores that have profited from the pandemic. When you look at, all the consumer goods stores, They profited hand over fist during at the height of the pandemic in March, April, May, June of last year, because of the surge in consumer demands, and we just couldn't keep product on the shelves because of the uncertainty that the crisis had created. So, their share prices went up, their sales went up. And these workers were essential workers. They weren't frontline workers like, God bless them, the nurses who, were putting their lives on the line, treating COVID patients, who still, quite frankly, have not been treated fairly after at this tail end of the pandemic, hopefully, now that we're seeing some light at the tunnel. But when we're looking at the folks that were working in these retail jobs and in the grocery stores that had to stay open, they provided a vital community service at a time when folks didn't know what was happening with the crisis and everything was on lockdown and we had to stay in our homes and quarantine. We couldn't see anybody. We couldn't see family. The connection that we felt to community was by going to these stores because we had to eat. We had to take care of ourselves. So we had to go to the Walmarts of the world, the Targets of the world. And the folks that were working, in the cashier's lanes, these are the folks that we connected with at a community level. We couldn't even see our neighbors, but we could see that cashier. And these are the folks that were putting their lives on the line also because we didn't know what kind of risk was being transmitted with infection during that time. They showed up to work and they haven't been treated properly because they haven't received adequate hazard pay, no pandemic pay, which is another thing that we're fighting for. In some cases, these stores, when they were seeing billions of dollars in profit extra compared to previous years, they had been giving their workers only $300 in bonuses. Well, something is lopsided there, right? It's just not fair for when you're risking your life to go to work because you have to go to work, quite frankly. You don't have another option. We called it a white collar quarantine. These blue collar jobs, they didn't have the luxury of quarantining. They had to go to work. So we are fighting for these workers because we know they want to be treated fairly. I come from this world. My mother was a domestic worker and a fast food worker. I grew up around these scheduling practices, which actually I can remember even when I was a kid going to work with my mom after school. I could see the stress that it was causing. I didn't exactly know at such a young age what fair scheduling meant, but I saw the toll that it was taking on my mom not being able to keep up. This is why we fight. This is why we're fighting for these folks. And these policies could make a meaningful difference in really lifting folks out of poverty, especially in a state like Connecticut, where we have such marked income inequality. And when cities like Bridgeport, Hartford, New Haven, according to the Alice reports, are just living one paycheck away from poverty, like in a city like Danbury, 50% of the population is living one paycheck away from poverty. Bridgeport and Hartford, 70%. One paycheck away from policy. And these are the folks that are mainly working in these service jobs. We got to do something. So, we're urging the governor, we're urging the legislature to really take a look at this. It's a fair policy that we're proposing this year that has the support of labor, community groups, women's rights groups, child welfare groups, health advocate groups. It's a big coalition of us and we got to do something. And we can't hide behind small business anymore. This is really a fight right now. Between the large multinational corporations who exploit workers just because they can and are resistant to change, or the low-wage workers who've really helped lift us out of the recession and stayed working to help give a semblance of normalcy during the pandemic.
So, Carlos, isn't this an issue that unions used to tackle?
It is. This is something that is typically negotiated in contracts with a lot of unions, like the UFCW, with a wide amount of labor unions, including, at the state, municipal, and government unions as well. So it's nothing new, but it's something, but because there isn't enough representation among unions, among retail and food service, because of the attacks on labor over the years and the decline in labor. Thankfully, Connecticut isn't suffering as much as other states, but we're still under heavy attack by right-wing organizations and a lot of dark money interests that flood our campaigns and the issue work that happens in the state. So we're very cautious, but this is something that would help lift the floor for labor unions too, when we're talking about unionizing new employees like at Amazon, right? We just suffered a defeat with Amazon workers there who've been fighting for labor rights, or a company like Trader Joe's, where there's lots of anti-union practices and scare tactics that happen within those companies that are well reported on and in the news. So, so yes, you're right. This is something that would help lift the floor for unions.
So how is our legislative? Is our legislative body receptive to this? To this? I mean, are they behind? I mean, I know Winfield and Porter would sink their teeth into this, of course. But do they have enough support? Is there enough support for this?
We think so. You know, the news out of New York City has directed attention and fresh eyes on the need for this legislation. So I think there's a little bit of more momentum happening this year in the legislature because of that. You know, you can't ignore what's happening at a store like Chipotle in New York City and not think, you know, and not want to explore what's happening here in our own state. We don't want that kind of exploitation happening here. And the research that is, you know, that folks that we have right now shows that these practices are the norm across retail and restaurant and hospitality. It's not just, you know, one bad actor. This is ingrained in the culture of these kinds of stores just because they can do it. And because employees have no power. When these employees, and I don't want to get too off track, but I do want to make one more point on this. When folks are when folks working these low wage jobs apply for these positions, they automatically enter an environment where the deck is stacked against them. Oftentimes they're signing non-compete agreements, meaning they can't pursue work in that industry if they decide to leave or quit or get fired. They sign forced arbitration contracts. So if there's a wage theft dispute or discrimination dispute, they've signed away their rights to the court, so they can't sue in a court. They have to enter into an employer-controlled arbitration hearing where the deck is stacked against them because the employer is who pays for the arbitrator. So it's already a very unlevel playing field. And then, you know, these organizations, these companies constantly lobby against things like passing paid family and medical leave, like they did for many years, passing a minimum wage. They resist efforts to unionize. And they want to keep, you know, the cost of labor as low as possible. And that includes not providing health care. So it's a very unhealthy, toxic atmosphere with folks that don't have the ability to, you know, quit. Like many folks say, if you don't like the job, just quit and get it. It's not that easy when, you know, as you said, folks need these jobs. They're not treated as a summer gig, you know, when I'm in between college session or school. These are folks that rely on these jobs year round. So to get back to your question, we are seeing some healthier support in the legislature. Of course, you know, the legislative body in New Haven has always been very supportive of this legislation and passing for it. It just passed out of the Judiciary Committee that was led by Representative Stastrom and Senator Winfield. And Representative Porter, who's the co-chair of the Labor Committee, is a strong advocate and champion for this, and is leading the charge in the House and in the Senate. Her Labor Committee co-chair is Senator Julie Kushner out of Danbury, who's also leading the charge there. And we are seeing interest among leadership. They're looking at this issue a little bit more meaningfully this year. And we have started to see more support among some of the more fiscally moderate Democrats, as we've seen, because, again, their concern has always been the impact on small business. Again, I think any business of any size can do these things, but something needs to be done because in light of what's happening with Chipotle, and I think folks are finally starting to pay attention to that and realizing that this is a fair bill that is going to tackle the problem where it is most egregious, and that is at this multinational level, corporate level. So we think it's going to happen. So
do you worry about Chipotle? What is their fight back? Like how do they fight back? Do they retaliate? And do the other big box multinational corporations pay attention to what's happening, and do they start forming their own sort of fight back plan, or do they say, okay, we can acquiesce to this? Because I can't imagine that they would acquiesce to this.
Actually, there has been some acquiescence before the Chipotle stuff happened. It's always under the threat of litigation. So interestingly, some of the retail stores discontinued these practices a few years ago. So there was a group of attorneys general that was led by the former attorney general in New York City, Eric Schneiderman, and also included the Connecticut AG at the time, George Jepson. It was a group of AGs that got together and started investigating these practices among retail stores like Walt Disney, Aeropostale, David's Tea Shop, a lot of these shops that appear in like shopping malls. And when these stores got wind of this, a potential class action lawsuit by, in multiple states coming their way, they automatically discontinued these practices. And we've seen they're still open. They're still selling stores. They're still selling clothes. They're selling tea and what have you. They have not suffered under the pandemic. And their employees are happier, at least, because they're not doing these practices anymore. So it's proven that it's not a necessity. So I think what we will see is acquiescence to this. I think the investigation into the Chipotle practices in New York City will be a bit of a watershed moment for these industries moving forward. And the fact that we are on the cusp of hopefully passing this law in Connecticut, will be the second state to pass this law. It's going to propel the movement much farther. In tandem with all the major cities that are passing these laws too. They can't ignore it anymore. So I think under the pressure of litigation, and folks, another effect of these laws that will happen is an industry-wide culture shift with regard to these practices, because when they have to play nice with these scheduling practices and be more responsible about them, what we're going to see is hopefully a trickle-down effect to the smaller stores, because they'll see that it hasn't hurt those businesses at this top macro level, and they'll see that they can also implement these changes, and the employees applying for these jobs will come to expect these kinds of practices, because it'll affect the job market and competition. So they'll see, I don't have to deal with this stuff, working at Target because they have to follow these Fair Work Week laws. I don't want to have to do this at a small business. So I think small businesses will come around too.
Okay. Wow. So this is quite exciting. Like, this is something that can make a huge difference in the lives of workers.
Yes.
And if it works here in Connecticut, if it passes here in Connecticut, I imagine that other states are paying attention, and you said other cities and towns are already doing some of this, doing this legislatively. So other places will look at this and say, okay, if Connecticut could do it, it's time for us to look at it. I worry though that, those red states in the South though, that are anti-union, anti-labor already, are not going to entertain this, and we'll find some way to, but how does that work with the big box store? Like, do they just do they acquiesce to the rules of this state, but if they're in a state that doesn't have this, they just business as usual? Like, or does this make them feel like, okay, we need to just do this across all our borders?
No, so we do know that there are stores in cities that have to obey Fair Work Week laws, and we know that stores in other cities or states without these laws don't play by those rules. So there is a disconnect.
Okay.
I think it's going to be, the more that these laws start to pass, at some point, it's going to be more cost effective for industry-wide change, because what happens from an administrative level is the software that these stores need to use, and it's software that quite frankly is pretty affordable for small businesses to use as well. There's a whole cottage industry that is propped up in the advent of these Fair Work Week laws, that are able to navigate these better scheduling practices, and can look at things like foot traffic at any time of year based on a seasonal basis or based on previous sales, and it can make estimations about how much workforce you're going to need on any given day. So it's no longer left to the discretion of a manager who's trying to make an educated guess. There's actual science and data that can help make smarter scheduling policies and practices moving forward. So they already are doing these things in these cities and states where they have to obey these laws. I think at some point it's just going to be more cost effective for them to implement, this technical infrastructure at a countrywide level. Okay.
So before you go, Carlos, tell me a little bit about the Connecticut Working Families. For those who have tuned in, probably heard something about the Connecticut Working Families, but don't really know what you do.
Oh, sure. We are an anti-racist, multiracial working class political organization, a progressive organization. We build power for working people. And, we endorse progressive candidates every election cycle. So we'll be, working with several candidates for the municipal races this year. And we're also an advocacy organization that, fights for this legislation like Fair Work Week, minimum wage, a lot of immigrant justice issues such as the Trust Act in previous years that we worked with our immigrant brothers and sisters on making sure that ICE cannot terrorize immigrants with the aid of local law enforcement. So, we have been around for about 20 years in Connecticut. We're a coalition of labor, immigrant justice, some faith leaders, folks that work in women's rights as well, and we're a growing organization.
Okay. So once you secure this fight, what's the next fight?
The perpetual fight that we're always locked in is one that's ongoing this year too. That's revenue, right? I mean, we live in the state of greatest income inequality. The third ranked income inequality, but when you look at Bridgeport and Greenwich, that's ground zero for income inequality. That's where the starkest division exists. So we're in a fight right now with the governor. We know that he doesn't want to raise taxes and on the wealthy, and we think a tax on the wealthy is a tax relief for the middle class, and that's what I think folks don't necessarily understand. It's a constant fight. We're coming out of a decade of austerity policies under Governor Malloy, where our social service agencies were depleted, leading to a lot of strain on like law enforcement agencies having to deal with problems that should be better handled by social service agencies. A lot of job loss in the employment sector, in the public employment sector, and at the same time that we're seeing a larger concentration of wealth among millionaires and billionaires. I mean, we just increased our amount of billionaires, I believe, by 5 or 6 new billionaires in the pandemic to 17 right now. When we live in a state that where the finance industry and the insurance industry has a grip on our state. We're locked in a fight right now to pass a solid public healthcare option. We're just coming out of a pandemic, and we have impressive Democratic majorities, the biggest in a very long time. If we can't pass healthcare now with those majorities coming out of a pandemic, when so many people experienced job loss and the healthcare loss that came with that job loss tied with it, and now have to go to Medicaid, and we can't, get more people on the exchange because we're not willing to pass a solid public healthcare option, then something is wrong. Something is wrong. The priorities are wrong. And, we could achieve that with a fairer taxation policy that asks our most wealthiest neighbors to pay a little bit more for the benefit of middle tax class relief, so that we can do things like expand healthcare and expand our social safety net for folks that are living and working in these low wage jobs that they're relegated to. So that's the perpetual fight: expansion of healthcare and progressive taxation, and one that's proving to be very difficult right now. But a lot of folks are involved, and we're not going to stop.
Carlos, this has been an amazing education. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your team that coordinated this. I think this is information that people will be very interested in hearing and knowing about. And I certainly learned a lot. I had no idea some of this was going on. And so I'm glad you're out there doing the good fight, making the good fight, good trouble, as the late John Lewis would say, good trouble.
Yes.
So thank you so much. You are welcome back anytime.
I appreciate that.
Just reach out and come back and talk, and we can have a whole other conversation about anything you want to talk about. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
All right, Harry. That was a good conversation, Harry. I had no idea that these big box stores were doing this to people. Chipotle, with all the stuff that Chipotle have been through, they would be you would think they would be better. They would be better, just be better. People stuck with them through their food poisoning, and now here they go trying to hijack people for time, scheduling time. I'm like, what is going on? So, and kudos to Connecticut for getting out in front of this and trying to raise this issue here. That's a good thing. So.
Yeah, it's something that's happening, especially with this COVID thing. There's been a lot of employers who have taken away PTO time, their personal time, their sick time on occasions where they get sent home. You know, so your employer sends you home not because you have COVID, but because you were in the vicinity of someone in the workplace who had COVID. Right? So now you have to stay home for 2 weeks, and they take whatever little days they give you from you, and you're left with nothing. So now if it happens again, you're out of work again, but this time without pay.
Yeah.
You know, so, and it's not just Chipotle, it's happening all over the state, because I know other places who are fighting the same thing, and unions who are fighting the good fight.
I'm telling you, people have to understand. People forget that unions is what got us far in terms of labor relations in this country. Because, you know, if it wasn't for unions, Harry, 5-year-olds would still be working in mines. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like people would still, you know, they'd still be locking bathroom doors and locking people in warehouses and that kind of foolishness, and not letting people have bathroom breaks and telling women to wear diapers. And I mean, it would still be that kind of foolishness that was going on. I remember my mother, you know, she was adamant about joining the union. She said, because I need to work in a safe environment. And in those days, women working, it wasn't safe environments, you know. So people need, I'm glad to see that there's a resurgence in unions and in union discussions and organized labor. Organized labor is what made America great. That really is what made America great. And to dissolve it, and to watch these people try to dissolve it, and to have this workers' right at will and all this other kind of stuff, you know, it just makes these corporations richer and no regard for the people that actually do this work. So I feel some kind of way about that.
Definitely. I mean, right now, Karen is the union steward at her location, and she became the union steward because it was a union contract that was negotiated, a legal contract, but it wasn't being applied in her workplace. So it gets to a point where people are disregarding the union contracts. And if there's no one there to say,
and if the workers are afraid, Harry,
because
everybody needs their job. And let's be honest, everybody needs their job, unless you're Melinda Gates or the ex-Mrs. Bezos. Everybody else, though, they need their job. And so people, you know, these businesses, Harry, have put the fear in people, you know, low-level threatening, high-level threatening. And people feel like this is why Amazon didn't get their union, because people were afraid. You know, they were afraid, Harry. And when you have fear like that, you just think, well, I have a job. I need this job. It's a decent paying job. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want, because Amazon is like, well, we could go somewhere else. We could do this. We could do that. You know, this low level conversation to people about, well, you know, we could just take our little company and go somewhere else, which they really can't, but they would say that kind of mess. And so people get afraid. So kudos to the Working Families Party, for raising some of these issues that are necessary. Because somebody's got to fight for these low wage people, Harry, who don't have union access, you know, who don't have money and attorneys and all that kind of stuff. They're just getting their $11 an hour, Harry, and just want to keep it. You know what I mean? Like, they just want to go to work. So I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's a hard fight. I've been in jobs where you're under constant attack and harassment, and you have nowhere to go with it. It's, you know, if you have no union, all you could do is sometimes is suffer your life, suffer your job. Yeah. You know, and you're the saddest person in the world because you're at a job that sucks, working for people who suck, and you're making little money. And, you know, you almost feel like you have no value.
Yeah. But not at 103.5 WNHH.
I've been there. Been there. Oh my God.
Not at WNHH. We good here.
I'm like, oh no, I'm not talking about WNHH.
No, I'm just saying. I'm trying to be like Paul, you know how Paul introduces, and you know, right here on W103.5.
No, yeah, I don't want somebody else writing an article. Whoa, Harry went in on Paul or something. No,
not
here.
But we know people who are under it, and
yeah.
I'm just, you know, we have to raise it, and we did today. So thank you, Carlos Moreno at the Connecticut Working Families.
And a lot of these places are low key putting pressure, low key harassment.
They are, Harry. They are.
No, but it's not just low. A lot of these places is blatant in your face.
Oh, because they already know, Harry. They're like, well, what you gonna do about it?
Yeah.
What you gonna do about it? Your union weak over here. You ain't got no union. What union you got? You ain't getting no union. And you put enough fear in people, Harry. They're gonna cave. They're gonna be afraid.
Yeah.
You know, they're just gonna be afraid. And I understand the fear. So I'm not mocking that fear. I'm not. I just hope that when it comes back around for them, that they recognize that they are stronger together than they are under the way that they are. That there's strength in numbers.
Definitely. And I know it's hard, but try not to associate your crappy job with you.
Yeah.
Because I used to walk around and it was like, as soon as I walked into a certain job, it was like a black cloud fell on me. And I was sick and all of those things. And I know people go through that. Because I've been through it plenty of times.
Oh, I've been to jobs that made me sick too.
God. Oh, God.
I hope I never have to go back to that world or that life.
No.
At this age, you know, God help me. I don't know. I'm gonna buy me some lottery tickets. All right, Harry, we gotta go. Who's up next? Who's up after me?
I gotta check my email. I'm not sure if it's a live show, but it's supposed to be Tabisa.
Well, if it's Tabisa and she put a damn good show on for the art walk, if you get a chance to see her on Facebook, I mean, she's always a consummate performer. Like, she just lifts the crowd, whatever space she's in. She just mesmerizes you. So she was at Art Walk this weekend, and she was phenomenal. So
yeah. You know, she's been really busy. I think she's gonna take a few weeks off.
They're not built like me, Harry. I don't take time. I work. Work.
You know, she was busy with school.
I'm a workhorse for this radio station.
She was busy doing a lot of things. She was going to school, you know, and then you have the homeschooling that everybody's doing these days, and then everything else. So it's like, woo.
These parents are like, I don't give a damn what teachers want. I'm giving it to them.
That's what I would say. Woo.
Listen, I'll pay a teacher's rent or her mortgage, whatever.
Hi, I'm Bella.
Oh,
and you can see
we gotta get out of here.
We gotta go.
At Spidey Girls / Bella.
All right.
You are listening.
Bye, Harry.
To WNAH LP 103.5 FM, New Haven, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Follow us.